evening. So while they're putting that up, you're going to hear from me about post-traumatic slavery disorder, and then you're going to hear from Dr. Gillespie trying to prove how slavery never existed. So let me start out. Why PTSD, post-traumatic slavery disorder? Slavery that happened hundreds of years ago. What does that have to do with the health of its descendants today? During slavery, more than one-half black infants died before they were 1 year of age. This mortality rate continued to double that of whites until the age of 14. Today, blacks continue to have the highest rates of infant mortality, the greatest chronic disease death rates, and the lowest life expectancies. We must ask why. Tired of being on the top of diseases and the bottom of life expectancies. The slave diet consisted of poor calories, lack of essential vitamins and elements, and today, not much has changed. Mental health and stress. The descendants of slaves' mental health was shaped by the survival mentality that gave the slave a dual mentality where it was unsafe to express his true feelings except in very safe spaces. According to black psychiatrist Dr. Alvin Toussaint of Harvard and other sociologists, the black church served as one of the few institutions where blacks could feel free to be themselves. And while talking in tongues, they covertly expressed rebellious ideas against their captivity and oppression. But outside the church, we were never allowed to play with a full deck of cards. However, whites played with a full deck of cards, while blacks were allowed to play with less. Even today, we get chastised for playing, quote, the race card, in spite of the fact in America, half the deck is full of race cards. So during slavery, this was necessary to avoid serious consequences, including death. Post-slavery, in a white supremacist society, we avoided conversations of race that made our former slave masters feel uncomfortable, except in safe places such as the black church. We are forced to have two separate conversations. The dual mentality was necessary for survival. But this was never healthy for our long-term physical and mental health. So this is family, and I want you to look around. Whether you call yourself white, Asian, Hispanic, or black, you're family. Because we're going to talk honestly and have this one conversation and let the healing begin. So I want to start out with this. I learned this from listening to Reverend Brown on TV the other night when he quoted Hosea, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge because they have rejected knowledge. Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom, and with all thy getting understanding." So, my hypothesis, post-traumatic slavery disorder, states racism and the legacy of slavery, as perceived by blacks and others, produces a unique, physiologic, and insidious chronic stress that I will refer to as allostatic load. This significantly contributes to increased risk to disease, including cardiovascular disease and premature deaths in African Americans. We're going to do a scientific process. That scientific process, let me talk about today. Scientists and clinicians of today tend to focus on data. They all talk about data, and based upon data, they ignore observation that they don't understand and evaluate data without historic content, and therefore misdiagnose and treat with poor outcomes. We're going to turn that around. We're going to support this hypothesis by incorporating a scientific process, evaluating data in the context of historic facts and the legacy, and addressing observations that may appear not to support the data. Only then can we make conclusions and recommendations. So what's the history? So the next two slides is a 2-hour conversation. The next two slides is a 2-hour conversation. This is a book called An American Health Dilemma, Volume 1 and Volume 2, written by Dr. Michael Bird and Linda Clayton, professors of public health at Harvard. It's over a 1,400-page document documenting the historic perspective of race, racism, and the legacy of slavery. And they have shown the connection between the environment of slavery and the health disparities that African Americans suffer today. They coined the term, not me, the slave health deficit. Dr. Bird and Dr. Clayton. Now, in their book, they talk about the black citizens' experience in the United States, going back to the beginning of slavery. From 1619 to 1865, 246 years, blacks were in chattel slavery. That's, since our existence in this country, about 65% of our existence has been under chattel slavery. From 1865 to 1965 was Jim Crow, in which the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment were virtually nullified with legalized separation. That's another 26% of our existence. And it really wasn't until 1965, and in their book into 2001, in which blacks began to have most civil rights experience with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Voting Rights Act of 1965. However, racialized poverty, high rates of incarceration, and persistent institutional racism continued. This is documented in the book by Michelle Alexander called The New Jim Crow. So if you look up into 2001, blacks' experience in this country for 382 years, add another 15 years, 400 years, health disparities in the African American community is related to our experience as slaves, Jim Crow, called the slave health deficit, and the struggle continues. So some time ago, when I was president of the National Medical Association, I was invited to the White House to talk about this issue, since the National Medical Association focused on health disparities. And we had our research team look at hundreds of articles. And the National Medical Association said, my God, when we look at the data, not only blacks, but Hispanics, the darker skinned Hispanics, the darker skinned Asians, have higher health disparities compared to the others. And there was a comment I made at the White House. There is a direct correlation between the level of health disparities and the amount of melanin in the population. Funny but true. This was documented by the Unequal Treatment Report published in 2001, done by the Institute of Medicine, where they concluded that race, racism, and discrimination were a significant part of the disparities that we see in healthcare today. One of the studies that they looked at was a study published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1999, where they had 8 actors, because the issue was, especially in cardiovascular disease, blacks were being treated differently and the outcomes were worse. Well, why is that? Because they're poor, they're ignorant, they won't take their medications. All of these things were postulated. So what they did was, these are 8 actors who participated in this study. They were videotaped, all had the same script. Thousands of physicians were asked, what is their diagnosis? The diagnosis was cardiovascular disease. Then they asked, what do you do? And the treatment was cardiac catheterization, but for some reason, many of the physicians, the majority of the physicians for African Americans, did not prescribe that intervention. They didn't know why. There is now a way we can measure your bias. So most of us feel we're not biased, but subconsciously we all have biases. And there is something called the Harvard Implicit Bias Test that now millions of folks have taken. And after a while, they've accumulated thousands of physicians that have taken this test. This is my profession. And what we found is that overall, physicians have higher anti-black biases as compared to other test takers, number one. Number two, all physician ethnic groups revealed anti-black biases. However, black physicians showed the least. That doesn't mean we all don't have biases. It just means we happen to show the least. And female physicians revealed less anti-black bias than male physicians, and black physician females the least. That can explain what we saw on that other test. It was a subconscious bias that exists. So although we're not in slavery, that was overt. It's now implicit. So what's the data? Can we measure the disparity and what it means? This is a diagram talking about premature deaths. These are deaths that should not happen. And in this, it's showing that Native Americans, blacks, had the highest rate of premature heart deaths, followed by black Hispanics, non-black Hispanics, Asian, and whites. And I conclude that American culture is bad for our health. It is killing us and we don't realize it. Why? The average life expectancy in the United States, 78 years. For Asians, the highest, 87. Hispanics, 83. Whites, 78. Native Americans, 75. But for us, here we go again. We're the last. Why? I'm telling you, you're going to hear that slavery didn't exist and that it's lifestyles and all that. That is true. But there's some, as Donald Trump said, something else is going on. So now, we actually have a device we can measure, I think, measure some of this. And I use it in about a year and a half ago, I was at the Be There San Diego, Dr. Maria, and they were talking about this new arteriosclerotic cardiovascular risk calculator. So they've been around a long time, but the new one now will measure your risk, but it includes race and ethnicity. So this is an example of one of my patients came in who had diabetes. He was being treated for hypertension. His cholesterol level was 230, and his HDL level was 45. His systolic blood pressure was high at 160, and he didn't smoke. Look at this. For a 40-year-old African-American male, his risk of having a heart attack or stroke in 10 years is 15.3, but the white male with the same numbers is 5.7. Therefore, his increased risk, or the disparity, is 2.6 times greater. For the black female, the disparity is 4.4 times greater than the white male. Genetically, we usually see the black man or white Asian much higher than the female. In our population, that's not true. What is happening with the black female? It is also true for the 50-year-old. This is the cardiovascular risk calculator, and you can click African American, white, or other. So if you click other, it comes out the same as white, but you got to dig deeper. And what it says is, these estimates may underestimate the 10-year lifetime risk for persons of some race and ethnicity groups, such as American Indians, Asian Americans from South Asian ancestry, and some Hispanics, such as Puerto Ricans, kind of the darker skinned ones. It may overestimate the risk of others, including some Asian Americans from East Asia and Hispanics, such as Mexican Americans. What is this telling us? What it is saying is that according to this risk calculator, African Americans have the highest cardiovascular risk. Why? Followed by Native Americans, Asians of South Asian ancestry, some Hispanics such as Puerto Ricans are next, followed by whites, and actually Hispanics, Mexican Americans, East Asians risk are less than whites. Yet, they live in poverty. Why? So, I know many of you think this is all genetics. And I'm telling you, they've been looking for the Negro gene to explain this for a long time. Okay? And they're going to continue to look because that's just who they are. There's a lot of money in it. But what we have here, Pima Indians who live in Arizona, 50% with diabetes, 95% with diabetes are obese. However, the same population Pima Indians living in Mexico have very little obesity or the usual rates of diabetes. Black Americans, their rates of hypertension are much greater than Africans from West Asia. As a matter of fact, I believe African Americans have the highest rates in the world. And newer Hispanics and African immigrants to the U.S. have better health outcomes than their counterparts in the U.S. Why? So, not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. I want to introduce you to the concept of Human Development Index. This looks at your health index, your educational index, and your income index, okay? So look at the bottom three. The lowest Human Development Index for a population are Hispanics, yet they have one of the highest life expectancies and one of the highest health indexes. Where they're low is in education and income. The two Native Americans and African Americans have higher incomes, higher education, but their life expectancies are at the lowest. I postulate that this has to do with the number of years the post-traumatic slavery disorder or the allostatic load has been put on those two populations versus the Latino population. It explains what they call the Hispanic paradox. So your disease, 25% is estimated to be caused by your biology, 52% by your lifestyle, 12% environment, and medical healthcare system accounts for 10%. Yet of the $3 trillion a year, 90% go to the 10% medical system. You wonder why it's so expensive. We're going to talk briefly about the allostatic load and the stress, air quality, chemicals, etc. I'm going to stress on racism because how we define the allostatic load is the chronic insidious physiological stress causing wear and tear on the body organs leading to disease. There are multiple things that do that, but what's unique to African Americans is racism. This is a depiction of how that chemical cascade causes that. In the African American community, heart disease is a little bit different than other communities. The leading cause is hypertension, for heart disease versus other communities is coronary artery disease. Hypertension is really associated with stress. And this was actually published in the Journal of Hypertension in 2000, explaining or trying to explain why blacks have a higher, I think they're pinging me, is that correct? Okay, so if you look here, you get enzymes released that cause increased peripheral vascular release. And I'll make this my last slide. So, post-traumatic slavery disorder and racism comes about because of what we call micro-insults. That means behavior that demeans a person in their racial heritage. Individual examples can be trying to get a cab in New York and you pass by, go into a restaurant and you're the last to be served. We get micro-assaults, explicit discriminatory behavior, supremacy ideology, and the N-word. You got the survival dual mentality, where we're navigating two worlds. We got institutional racism, where societal customs, laws, policies result in explicit or implicit biases. And then internal racism that can actually be measured by the implicit bias test, and many blacks have anti-bias beliefs, showing that they still have poor thought processes of themselves. So I'm going to end, because I just heard the music, showing that blacks have high allostatic load. We talk about adverse childhood experiences. What's interesting is we're now seeing whites for the first time. Their death rates increase because their allostatic load is increasing because of what I call loss of white privilege. That's not funny, it's just true. This concept has been taken in Australia, where the Aboriginal people are suffering similar things, and they have taken it to heart and have a public campaign showing how racism makes them sick, affecting their blood pressure, etc. And I want to conclude that your poor lifestyle, along with adverse childhood events that are like non-racial, blacks, Hispanics have higher adverse childhood experiences. The more you have in childhood, the greater your chronic diseases. And then the specific allostatic load that you get from racism leads to increased cardiovascular death, early death of blacks in America. And I want to end with a quote. Stress reduction, we're not talking about, but that's a major recommendation. But I want to end with this quote by W.E.B. Du Bois, The Souls of Black Folks, 1903. The problem of the 20th century is the problem with the color line. It is peculiar to sensation. This double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two wearing ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. Thank you.
So, Dr. Gillespie, you mean to tell me you're going to stand in front of 200 people and other guests and convince that slavery never happened? No, I'm not going to convince him. I'm not going to try to convince you that slavery never happened, because he's worked out. We know that slavery unequivocally occurred. African Americans were exposed to all the things that Roger stated earlier. Jim Crow, Reconstruction, all the things that tried to undo all the laws that changed in America. Since then, we've endured institutionalized and blatant racism. There's no question about that. We've had micro and stuff, we deal with it every day. The job promotions you don't get, the subtle things that happen, even in my practice. Most people don't have to deal with it. There's no question. We know that our young kids are subjected to not only things that happen when we are dealing with the police, the Michael Browns, and all the others, but young kids who have died, or young men who have died. We deal with it in Chicago We deal with it when black kids are fighting each other for all the things that we know have affected them. I'm not trying to argue that at all. We also know, though, that cardiovascular disease is killing us, and that we know that we have to do something about it. And I can't wait for someone else to stop being racist for us to make a difference. That's the only point. That's what I want to go with. These are things I'm going to show you. First of all, I read this book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. Points out a lot of things that we've talked about already. It exists. I would recommend all of you to listen to this, look at this, and listen to the things that Dr. Flynn has to say. Keep it in perspective. And that's why I say this is a different perspective. Not necessarily opposing perspective, but a different perspective is my title. My conversation today will talk about what Rodney warned you about. I am going to talk about the traditional risk factors that African Americans have in this country. I am going to talk about how policymakers, how healthcare givers, and the people in this room have to make a difference. It has to be us. I'm not going to wait for someone else to do it for me. Our time is better spent dealing with that than waiting for this hypothesis to be true. That's the point I'm trying to make to you today. I can say this to you: if we can control hypertension alone, that would eliminate the disparity. That's just killing us. And I'll show you some more data. Wilma Booth, I think, proved my point already. She showed the data that I'm about to go over today. We're here to talk about black folks. What's happened to us? We were at 450 deaths per 100,000. Think about that. That's a huge number in the year 2000. What has happened between 2000 and 2013? We have come down substantially below this rate of 300, almost right at 300%. Why is that important? Let's look at what's happened with white people over that same time. Look at the gap from here to here. This gap is huge. This gap is small. What does that mean? Are we where we want to be? No, we're not. Guess what's happened? We've gotten better relative to the baseline. It's sort of like when people argue against affirmative action. Obviously, if you're not on the same page to begin with, you can't win. You don't expect the same person to be as advanced as the others. We can't expect that at this moment in time, when we started off here, that we would still be here at that point. So my point I'm making for all of you, no, we are where we want to be, but we are making progress. So let's not ignore data. We get in trouble. Historically, data has been used incorrectly to oppress us. So don't get into that habit of ignoring data. Data is what makes the difference. Same with stroke. Look at stroke. What Dr. Wooten earlier talked about how African Americans have gotten much better at stroke. How we decreased in San Diego. I was so impressed to see that. That's amazing. Look at nationwide. We've gone from above 80 all the way down here. White, 60, yes, starting again at a better place. But look, again, look at the gap here to here versus here to here. Progress. That happens because of medical care and things that we've been able to do in medical care. So this is my post-traumatic slavery disorder and how I want to attack it. Right in that many ways might be saying the same things at times. Social determinants of health. This is what makes the difference, and this is what we have to deal with. We have to deal with folks at a young age, teach our kids right, eat right, exercise right. We have to put pressure on our politicians to deal with these issues. Education is things and continue to work on making sure our young kids are educated. We mentioned earlier that 90% with high school education in San Diego. That's an amazing number compared to the rest of the country. And I think some of the statistics would point out that we are different in San Diego than we are in the South and other places. Food security, housing status, income, yes, all of these are major determinants of health that we have to continue to work with in our communities and with our healthcare givers. Moving forward, the most important things I'm going to emphasize today. I often tell people 70 to 75% of heart disease would go away if we ate right, if we exercised, if we didn't smoke. We did all the things. Some people quote as high as 90%, but I'm going to be very conservative. That's important. It's also important that we figure out ways to not have food deserts in our communities. Because we know that we can go in our communities and we don't have places to have fresh fruits and all the things that many of us are fortunate enough to have as on a daily basis. Health services are important. My point is we need to really focus on making changes. This is the root of what we call PTSD maybe. These are all the things that Ryan is pointing out. But as a scientist and as a person and a caregiver, I want to attack these one by one with the help of everyone in this room. We can do it. We've already made high progress. What are the facts about high blood pressure or hypertension? Black folks get it younger in life and more devastatingly so. We've developed kidney disease 4.2 times requiring end-stage dialysis where you have to use a machine to get the function in your kidneys. That happens to us 4.2 times more than whites. That's a lot. If it's strictly hypertension related, it's 20 times greater. When you talk about stroke, 1.5 times greater fatal stroke, 1.8 times fatal stroke, 1.5 times greater for rate of heart disease. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide. I'm going to say we have huge amounts of hypertension. You see it here. See how much higher it is than everyone else. You're talking 40% versus 25% or so. Treatment, even though we're actually treated better in many ways than some other groups, we are treated more to gold than whites. However, because our numbers are so much higher, it still has a huge impact on our outcome. Such that if you look at the difference, our disparity is substantial for hypertension-related death. If you look at blacks, it's 16.7% age-adjusted deaths per, that's actually a percentage of the population, this is incorrect. And whites, the percent that is 6.8%. So huge numbers compared to whites. Why is this? Could it be PTSD, which would come down in part related to stress? It's possible. But really, right now, we just don't know. We don't know. Possibly it's because our disease occurs earlier in life. We know that happens, right? That's a fact. Could it be multifactorial there? Because and I'll show you a slide later that shows how many risk factors we have when it comes to heart disease. Could it be that? Could it be partly genetic? I agree with Ryan. That's not going to be the major reason, but it is a factor. And also remember one thing. If you have a genetic predisposition to a condition, and then you make a decision to go out and smoke, you make a decision to go out and eat poorly, you make a decision to not exercise, you may have a gene that will sit there for years and not express itself. You turn it on the minute you make a decision to live an unhealthy lifestyle. That's a factor. So genetics and epigenetics, or other things that can happen are not always so obvious when we look at it. Because genetically, we're so similar when we look at whites and blacks, it would be hard to explain it strictly on genetics. But if you unmask a bad gene, who knows? I want to point this out quickly. I don't want to get too scientific, that's not the point tonight, but I do want you to know the facts. This is what happened a couple of years ago, 2014. The Joint National Commission is the commission that does the hypertension guidelines for us in the United States. They made a decision. They had a small committee that was put together. They made a decision that you were over the age of 60, and you didn't have kidney disease or diabetes, we can raise the blood pressure to 150 over 90. You're talking about something that's crazy. They want to raise it from 140 over 90. See what he's doing? Look at that. I'm trying to get it off my game. What happened, baby? Let's go. So, now, thank you. Don't get everybody else. All right, so they tried to change it. Now, we already knew that hypertension kills us. But now we're going to raise the number to 150 over 90. What the heck are they thinking? Okay? No data to support that. So what did we do at the ABC and others? We were fortunate enough to, with the help of one of the gentlemen we're honoring tonight, we wrote this article that was published in the Journal of American College of Cardiology. And basically, we made the point that this would kill more black folks than anything else when we made this decision. This was picked by Jack as the #1 article for hypertension that was published in the year 2014. That was from the Association of Black Cardiologists and others. So I just want to point out, that's why it's important that we do things to make a difference by looking at the data. When it's wrong or put out in a way that might harm us, that's how we make a difference. We have to make decisions that will change what happens in our lives. What else can we do? Food. Our attitudes toward food have to change. The Association of Black Cardiologists put out a tape with the blessing of pastors in the community. I want to make that clear. Tape is entitled, "Don't Eat the Church Food Until You Watch This Tape." Now, for those of you, as I did, I grew up in a Baptist church. My mom made sure I went every Sunday. I went to Sunday school every Sunday, tried to skip out, even go to Mr. Hollis' Mr. Teddy, and I paid away at church. But one of the things that is very important, when I used to go to church, I used to eat fried chicken. I used to eat it every time. I love it. I grew up loving fried chicken. Speaking of which, what would happen if on Juneteenth, Donald Trump said, "I love fried chicken"? So now, look at the rest of this. Do you realize that food is the leading risk factor of disability in this country? The leading risk factor for disability. Look at the number of folks in 2010, food in itself died based on food itself, 678,000. We also know that these companies target our community. They target the Black community. This article came out in San Diego Tribune a couple of years ago. Some of you may have read it. And it's a study that was done at the University of Illinois. And what it showed was that African Americans were disproportionately targeted for these kinds of foods. That's why you go to every store and you see McDonald's, so on and so on. You don't see any fresh foods in there. That's the problem. Me too. The other thing is 13% of kids between 2 and 18, 13% of the calories between kids 2 and 18 are in fast foods. That's the problem. This is how our food should look. Our plate should be full of vegetables and fruits. This by itself will make a huge difference in the outcome. What about diabetes? I think most people think Mexicans have higher diabetes rate than Blacks. I'm going to show you something that's not true. Let me show you this. First of all, diabetes kills all of us. Black, white, green, purple, it doesn't matter. But it kills women, 8 years left on their life, 7.5 years less for Blacks. For women, for men, I should say. 1 in 10 Americans have diabetes. Really bad for all of us, particularly African Americans. Look at the numbers for African Americans. It's the middle slide. And what you see here, 13.8% African Americans, 12.5% Hispanic. This is the males. Women, 14.6%, 11.8%. So here we are. We are the group that has the highest diabetes. What else do we have? Obesity. 57% of Black women are considered obese. BMI over 25. BMI over 30. That's when you look at your weight and your height. Then you calculate. 17% have a BMI over 40, which is morbidly obese. What does that mean? What does this compare to whites? 6% of women, white women, have this. Half of this number is white men. These are not numbers we like to hear, but it's true. These are the numbers that, in fact, it's the data that we have to deal with. Look at the numbers for Mexicans and for whites. It's not even close. So we really have to look at it. 57%, 39, 34, 35. You can't ignore the data. What about physical activity? Why is it that this occurs? When does it start? Look at this number here. This is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to exercise an hour, be a child before the age of 18. An hour a day is what your exercise should be. If you were an adult, it should be 150 minutes per week. So, 40 minutes, 3 to 4 days a week in that range, something like that. 30 minutes to 60 minutes, plus 2 days of strengthening exercise. Now, if you look at the data, what happens to Black kids? Black girls, under the age of 18, 27% do not meet this guideline. How does that compare to whites? 9%. Hispanics are in the middle. Black boys, 15 versus 9. This is all data from the CDC. I'm not making it up. Watching TV greater than 3 hours. Same thing. 55% for Black, roughly 52 to 55%. Half of that for white kids. Hispanics in the middle. You don't think that has a role in our disease? Now, don't get me wrong. There are some times in the community you don't want to go out and play because it's dangerous, so you end up staying in the house. I understand that and I get that. But I also get that that's where we come in and we make a difference by organizing and making sure our kids have safe places, and we just got to do it. It can't be this thing. It used to be for us to go to the Y. When I was growing up in Gary, Indiana, now I didn't always live high on the horse now. It was I mean, I grew up in Gary, Indiana. At the time, it was the highest murder rate in the country. So, Rodney's going to try to make me like I'm going to try to prove the slavery's not around. But no. I didn't just grow up making money. I don't want you to think that. Life did get good later on, I must say. Now, if you look at this here, these are the factors that we have to look at. And that is, I don't want you to even look at this busy slide. All I want to point out to you is this. When you're black, you have not only one of these, you have a higher risk of all of these. Higher risk of diabetes, higher risk of hypertension, higher risk of what did I leave out? Hypertension, obesity, lack of exercise. All these factors come together to increase the likelihood of one dying or having a higher risk. So our job is to consider that and to think about it. Yes, we do have this disparity, one that I'm not proud to see. There it is, between blacks and whites and blacks and Asians. But look at the line, it has continued to get better. This is an interesting slide, though. I really want you to look at this. This is very encouraging to me. I only want you to focus on two slides. It's two parts of the slide. This is the first one. This is where we started back in 1975 as blacks between the white and black life expectancy. It was 6.5. It went up to about 7 in the 1990s. And as it's come down now, there's a 3.5-year difference between black and white life expectancy. That was as 2013. Are we where we want to be yet? No. But are we going in the right direction? Absolutely yes. Look at this slide. Black men continue to go up. White men have leveled off. But we're continuing to have a life. Now, it's kind of leveled off here, so we need to continue to work. But if you look at the trend, black males versus white females, black males versus white males, look at the difference here versus the difference here. It's narrow. That's encouraging. It's okay to be happy about the advances we made. We don't have to be mad. It's a good thing. So, what are our solutions? I've already said much of it. One is by 2020, if you get healthy people, Dr. Wooten mentioned this earlier. We've already made some of these goals in San Diego, but you got to remember the stroke belt is down south. It's a whole other story. I wish you would have projected, comparing that to South Carolina or Mississippi. You would have seen a whole different number. I guarantee you that. I don't know that because I don't know exact numbers there, but I can't imagine it's the same number. Right, Wilma? It's not the same. Know about the ABC 7 steps. Know about the ABC 7 steps. Live those 7 steps is important. Media campaigns on diet, exercise, and smoking have to continue. We have to have healthy food in our workplaces. The other thing that's really important, I got to take a hat off. One of the things that one of my very good friends is doing at the neighborhood house, and that's why I put it here, exercise facilities and workplaces. Rudy Johnson, he has employs one of the highest numbers of African Americans in this country, in this city. He has a working program, an exercise program for his employees. And from my understanding, there's a high percentage of employees who are doing that. We have to do that. Black people in particular have to do that for our employees. This is a world-renowned hypertension specialist who has published in every major journal and is on major committees in this country. I'm not going to name it, but this is what he told me. I said, what do you think about PTSD? He said, this is a deeply religious gentleman. He goes to church every Sunday. He said, Bob, I only deal with beliefs on Sunday morning before the football game. At all times, and especially when it involves the health of black folk, I'm only interested in data. We have had so little for so long, and it has literally killed us. Most of my career has been devoted to providing data to debunk or prove beliefs that have harmed our community. These beliefs have become dogma, forming the basis of treating and mistreating black patients that continues to plague our community. What is proposed here, PTSD, is a hypothesis. We need to advocate more for the benefit of our community than to promotion of hypotheses without data. Hypotheses are to be tested with data and not debated as evidence, Dr. Hood. Now, I want to end this. I asked Reverend Brown to help me with this. What did I ask you to help me with this? All of you from the faith-based community, please help me with this. God, grant me the serenity. Accept the things I cannot change. Courage to change the things I can. And the wisdom to know this. I'm out. The rest of you out.